Hello, everyone. My name is Rodney Hakim, and I welcome you back to New York Shakespeare. We're back here for the fall season, and it is back to school season here in New York. New York it's the city that never sleeps, but it is also the city that emphasizes Shakespeare. You know how important Shakespeare is in New York, but as important as Shakespeare is, what is Shakespeare without Shakespeare education? We are in the back to school season, so we are here to talk about Shakespeare education and how it starts even from the earliest of ages. We are thrilled to be joined here tonight by our chief guest, Ken Ludwig, writer, director, producer extraordinaire. He's all over the world with his. I think you are being performed everywhere in the world at once. Is that right, Ken?
It is true. I say it with great shame, and I'm very abashed. But yeah, every night of the year, there's one of my plays is on. Yeah.
And you've been on Broadway, you've been on the West End, you've been all over town. I'm just going to hit some of your big shows. You have Lend Me a Tenor, you have Crazy for You, you've got so many shows that have been international hit shows, hits on Broadway for so many years. Ken, when did you get into developing all these amazing, massive shows?
Well, it's very kind of you to say it that way. I was a kid who grew up in York, Pennsylvania. I thought theater was the greatest thing in the world. It's all I ever wanted to do was be in the theater. I wrote plays in high school. In college, I directed and wrote them. And when I got out of graduate school, I knew I wanted to be a playwright. And I had a day job. It was actually practicing law because I'd gone to law school. So my parents said, you better get yourself a degree. So I was practicing law and I started writing plays, and I had my first big break. I wrote about 3 or 4 plays. You've got to pay your dues. And I had my first big break when Andrew Lloyd Webber produced Lend Me a Tenor on the West End. It was a big hit. And then he brought it to Broadway. And because that was on Broadway, and it was the only real comedy on Broadway at the time, a producer out of the blue called me named Roger Horchow and said, I have the rights to all the Gershwin music and wanted to do a musical, and I wrote Crazy for You. And so once I got on that role and was able to give up my day job, I then wrote Moon Over Buffalo, which was on with Carol Burnett on Broadway, and then in the West End at the Old Vic with Joan Collins, and I was on a roll, and I since it's all I ever wanted to do. Lucky me, I got to do it the rest of my life.
That's fantastic. You know, how many people can say that what they dreamed and aspired of doing as a teenager, they had the opportunity to do that and have become one of the most successful and well-known and well-respected individuals in the world at that endeavor. So hats off to you, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us here tonight. So Ken, we know that you are a playwright. You have written so many musicals. I think you have 32 plays and musicals to your credit. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes. That's such an amazing collection of works. And we have this book here that we're discussing tonight, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. And this came out 3 years ago, Ken?
Yeah, maybe 5 or so. It's Penguin Random House. That's the paperback. Get ready for this. I have the hardback. I brought the hardback with me because I found it on my shelves. And yeah, it's just gone into another printing in the paperback. They asked me, it's Penguin Random House, whether I might want to expand it. And I think I love Much Ado About Nothing so much, and I'd never added a chapter on that. So I thought I'd do a chapter or 2 maybe this fall on Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, so there's kind of like there's a director's cut to a movie. There's going to be
yeah, right.
An author's addendum to How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. So you were an aspiring playwright, and you wrote these plays, and they caught on, and they went to the West End, they went to Broadway. Where did your connection to Shakespeare begin?
The connection to Shakespeare started earlier, and it's really what got me into theater. When I was a youngster, I was about maybe 10 years old. My parents, years before that, had seen Hamlet on Broadway with Richard Burton, directed by John Gielgud.
Wow.
And it was popular Hamlet that it was made into a record, a series of LPs, and they gave it to me for my birthday. And I listened and I memorized. I won't say I memorized the whole thing. I think people who say those things are usually not telling the truth, but I sure did memorize all of Hamlet's soliloquies. and so that they could just pop out of my mouth. And not because I had a method the way I now do in this book, but it was because I loved them so much. I loved the sound of it. I loved Richard Burton's inimitable sound. And I became so hooked on Shakespeare. So then when they were doing a re-release of Julius Caesar, I remember my father, and this is little York, Pennsylvania. It was at our little movie theater, believe it or not. And I'll never forget his kindness in because he wasn't interested in this. He was a doctor, a small, a dermatologist in a small town in York, Pennsylvania, but because he knew I loved it so much, he took me to see that, and my brother would take me to see Shakespeare, and I became so enamored and recognized early on how important Shakespeare was, and how seminal, how he created, in a way, the way Harold Bloom says, the invention of the human. He sort of created us, and I just knew somehow viscerally that was where I wanted to spend my life. So Shakespeare was first.
Okay, so you have that early connection, that fascination with Shakespeare, that you're listening to it on the LPs, you're memorizing the great monologues and some of the most sonorous, beautiful voices in the history of theater, Richard Burton, John Gielgud, and you take that, so you're studying it, you're embracing it. Does that become part of your further studies as you're in college and beyond? Do you go to special Shakespeare school? Do you go to studio work? Where do you develop your skills?
Well, I was a great student. I loved being a student. I was at Harvard. I was at Harvard Law School. I was got a scholarship to study in Cambridge. So I was at Cambridge University, Trinity College. And all the while I was doing, I majored in English as well as music composition. And there was a professor there named Professor Ralph Sargent, who specialized in Shakespeare, and I took not only all his courses, but he became my mentor. I'd go to his house for special consultations. All my senior year, we do just one-on-one, and it was, it was life-giving. It meant everything. And then when I was in Cambridge, I studied literature there as well, so I did. So I studied it seriously as an academic proposition, as well as all the while, especially for the years in England, and I go back to England all the time now. A lot of my work's done there. I see as much Shakespeare as I can. So when I was a student there, I saw everything that the Royal Shakespeare Company did for 3 seasons running, every single show.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, and it was so worthwhile. It just made all the difference.
So in the midst, in your the ensuing decades in your prolific career, did you have a chance to act in or direct Shakespeare along with the other musicals that you were writing?
Well, I acted in high school. I directed in college. I've never acted in Shakespeare. I spouted all the time. I can be at a dinner party and start saying it, and people's eyes glaze over for a minute until I finally get to them and go, but listen carefully. Even though I don't say it beautifully, listen carefully. And by the way, let me mention that when I talk about, listening to those beautiful voices of Richard Burton and John Gielgud, when you get the book, and you don't even have to buy the book to get it. You go to the website of the book, and there are recordings of all the passages that I discuss in the books. And those were, this is name dropping, but one of my best friends in the world is Derek Jacobi and his husband, Richard Clifford. And Derek and Richard recorded those passages for the book. And talk about beautiful voices. Oh my God. So
for a certain generation, Derek Jacobi was, and he still is, one of the premier Shakespeare actors in the world. So that's no small company to be having.
No, it's not.
That's amazing. And so, speaking of your book, so how to teach your children Shakespeare. How long did it take you to put this book together? When did it start? I know it came out about 5 years ago in hardcover, and then later in paperback with addendums on the way. Keep your eyes out for that New York Shakespeare exclusive. But when did the process of putting this all together begin, and how did it all shape out?
Well, what happened when I was raising my kids, my daughter, I have a son and a daughter. The daughter's the older one. And when she came back from um, first grade, one day she said to me, Daddy, I know a bank where the wild time blows. And I sort of did a double take. I said, where did you learn Shakespeare? You're in first grade. Her teacher was English. She loved Shakespeare and had taught them 4 lines of Shakespeare, which is the opening passage I use in this book. So I thought to myself, what a great opportunity. I love Shakespeare so much. She's 6 years old, first grade. But I thought, if she's memorized 4 lines, let's snuggle up on Sundays and memorize passages together. So we started. And by the end of the first year, she already knew about 6. If you look at the opening passages in the book, she knew about 6 or 7. They were 10, 12, 15 lines each. The reason is, as you think about it, they're a little bit like nursery rhymes, especially, and I used early on a lot of Midsummer Night's Dream because I could tell her the story, and it's all about the wonderful fairy kingdom of Oberon and Titania and mischievous Puck, in a kid's way of looking at Midsummer. And also, a lot of it rhymes. It's a very high percentage of rhyme in Midsummer. So the opening passage, I know a bank where the wild time blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows. So it rhymed, and she was able to, and because it's rhythmic, she was able to memorize it. And by the time she went off to college, she knew 1,000 lines of Shakespeare.
Wow, I mean, that's like impressive. That.
And what you have to do when you use the book or when you learn Shakespeare, it's very easy. The stealth title of the book is How to Teach Yourself Shakespeare. Because you and I both know we love it so much, but we encounter a lot of people in the world who say, "Oh my gosh, that's a little frightening or scary." It seems difficult if you just pick it up. But if you take it, what the book says, take it slowly, learn every word, learn the meaning of every word. I know a bank for a youngster. A bank is a grassy, knoll where the wild time blows. Thyme is an herb. It's a flower. And Shakespeare being Shakespeare, it's also a play on the word time, Time. I know because it's a magical kingdom where the wild time blows. And taking it at that speed with even a youngster who's quite young, they start to absorb it and start to love it.
So I have the same experience with my daughter. My daughter, her first exposure to, she's 10 right now, but her first exposure to Shakespeare came exactly with that, with A Midsummer Night's Dream. And it was maybe, 3 or 4 years ago. So around the same age as your daughter.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about that particular play because, as you say, it has the rhythmic quality to it, the rhyming, but it has that semi-magical fairy world, that almost dreamlike world that children are more connected to than adults necessarily might be at this age, where they can connect. Well, I have fairies and this kind of character in my imaginary play or in this other story that I connected to. So there is that connectivity there.
And exposing young children is a great thing. I was just listening by chance today in the car. There was a BBC podcast about 3 or 4, 5 years ago. I don't know how I came upon it, with the 3 of the children's laureates in England. In England they have a position the way we have poet laureate. Is that what we call it?
Yeah, poet laureate. Mm-hmm.
Poet laureate. They have in addition to a poet laureate, they have a children's poet laureate. And they've had this for a couple decades. And 3 of them were being interviewed at length by this obviously tremendously intelligent BBC interviewer. I recommend this highly. And what they discussed in the first part of it was how important it was to expose youngsters to reading. They were talking about reading in general, and that once you expose them really early, they really love it and will do it for the rest of their lives. And it's the same with Shakespeare.
It's very similar to teaching a child a foreign language or something like that, or just any kind of concept, whether it's language, whether it's whatever that's outside of the mainstream things that they learn about, because when they start learning at a younger age, there's less resistance to it and they're able to pick up on it a little bit more quickly than adults might. Do you have that experience where adults are more reluctant or it's more difficult for them to learn?
Absolutely. We get so much dumber as we get older. Kids are so open to it. Oh, that's fun, Dad. You must have had this with your daughter.
Sure.
You know, it's an adventure. It's exciting. There's no barriers. They don't hear the word Shakespeare and go, oh, it's going to be a little hard. I think I'll get nervous about it. They're
Right.
so open to it. And then they just learn to love it and then keep pressing them with the next passage and then explain the stories. And I wrote the book. I didn't plan on writing a book about it. I'd done all that with my daughter and then my son. And then a few years ago, because I'm represented by WME at one of the big agencies, William Morris Endeavor, I also have they have all kinds of agents. I have my representative who takes care of plays and movies and things like that. They also have a big literary department. So a friend of mine came and said, I have a book. Do you know any agents who would look at it? So I called Jonathan Lomo, my agent, and said, what about somebody in your literary department? I sent this book off for my friend as a favor. They didn't want it, but the agent, one of the great book agents of all time, said to me, Ken, I know your plays. What book have you written? And I said, well, Eric, I don't write books. I write plays. And he says, I'll bet you have a book somewhere in your house that you started and didn't finish. And I looked around my study and I had indeed written about the first 4 chapters of How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare.
Wow.
And then put it aside because I thought, who's going to want to read about Shakespeare? So Eric asked me if I'd send it to him, and I did. And he said, we got a real book here. You got to finish it.
Isn't that amazing how something like that works out, where it's something that you kind of start offhand and it's just, it's a fun thing that you're doing on the side to express yourself or entertain yourself. Then all of a sudden there's some way that it finds its way out, and then all of a sudden here it is and it's published. And I think this book earned the title Best Shakespeare Book of the Year. Where did that get that distinction?
Well, I was so lucky. It got published by Penguin Random House, and this wonderful, wonderful group of scholars and people who run a Shakespeare site. Now, I was also attached to I was on the board of governors of the Folger Shakespeare Library for 10 years, who also have a website. I think the two feel a little competitive. It was this other website that I'd never submitted it to the Folger. I didn't submit it. They found it. I don't know. I guess Random House, Penguin Random House must have submitted it, sent it to this other wonderful Shakespeare site who do their vote every year. They look over their 1,000 Shakespeare books, and I got the Falstaff Award for Best Shakespeare Book, and I was thrilled to pieces.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So we're talking about Ken Ludwig's book, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, and this being the back to school season, kids are back to school. It's a kind of a different time right now where we're coming out of an altered, a skewed period of time where there was the coronavirus pandemic. Schools were shut down for a year and a half in some cases, if not longer. And there was a kid learning by Zoom, and then now everyone's back in person. What to you is the value of kids learning in person and getting to experience not just your book per se, but that kind of learning, that kind of interaction, that kind of play, theater games, whatever the case might be, in person as opposed to just on Zoom?
Well, because it is interaction. We don't interact on Zoom the same way. We don't see the whole group of children in front of us. Well, I mean, what a difference from me saying to you, repeat after me. And I have done Zoom, obviously, classes because Shakespeare groups ask me to do them. And I want kids not to lose 2 years of their lives or 3 years of their lives. But the difference is just enormous. We get together when I do go to schools and we get together and there's 10 children in a room and we all say together, I know a bank where the wild time blows. And then I explain this odd thing called iambic pentameter. I left no ring with her. What means this, lady? Da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum. 5 beats. Emphasis on of the each iamb has 2 sounds to it. Da dum and pentameter means 5 in Latin, so iambic pentameter, 5 beats, and we say it all together, and they can dance and they can move, and it gets into their blood. So being live is going to be so great.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so many of our programs are conducted on Zoom or on Instagram Live or other mediated formats. But it's when their opportunity is there for people to interact with each other live. It's just such a different phenomenon. If you look at the way the theater scene in New York is booming again right now after being in a lull, after being shut down, it's everyone's rushing out to. Theaters are overwhelmed with audience members wanting and craving that live interaction. So, again, if there's someone that we were speaking about how it's better to start as a child, but for adults who are coming to Shakespeare later, how can they get themselves off of the intimidation factor of the idea that, oh, well, Shakespeare, it's too hard, and I don't know what a thee from a thou, and how do you ease out of that mentality?
Well, I think 2 things. One is, of course, go to Shakespeare plays, because so many of these wonderful productions that are available. Last year in the park, was it A Much Ado, or what was it set in New York and in a neighborhood? Was that Midsummer, or was that Much Ado? I forget. But they're so accessible. All these wonderful productions are accessible. Go off to see productions. Get beguiled by it, because the actors are terrific. Nobody does fuddy-duddy Shakespeare anymore. Now, when Gielgud was doing it, it wasn't fuddy-duddy Shakespeare. It was the way they did Shakespeare. But then there was the revolution that happened after Peter Brook did his famous Midsummer Night's Dream. And suddenly it was joyous and it was out of the box. Go to Shakespeare productions. And then, I hate to say it, and it's promotional, but start the book. Start this book. I don't know that there are any other books that do this. And the reason I did it was because, having done it with my children, it works. And it works with adults. When I'm around a table, I was at McCarter Theater for one of my premiere of one of my plays a few years ago. And here's all these real intellectual groups, because that's in Princeton, New Jersey, and Joyce Carol Oates was around the room, and all these wonderful people. And they asked me about it, and I said, all right, let's do a passage together. And we did, and they're all adults, and it's the same thing. So you might not start with, I know a bank where the wild time blows, but you might start with, angels and ministers of grace defend us, from Hamlet. You might start, I was looking at a passage from Macbeth. I can say it because I'm in her house, not her theater. That you might start with, and this is Lady Macbeth. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. That's not kid stuff.
I don't know how for me, I don't know how you don't get drawn into something like that. But there are people that don't. So Ken, you come from an academic background, in the beginning at least, where you studied at Harvard and Cambridge, and you had that academic that rigor of how to approach Shakespeare or how to approach learning. How did you go from that academic level to a more performative approach to Shakespeare?
Well, through studying Shakespeare and the opportunity of seeing so many, Shakespeare is still, it's remarkable. Think of it this way. Here we are, born in 1564, and he is still the most performed playwright in America. When you look at the lists, American Theater puts out who's performed most, I'm always thrilled when I'm on it. But it's nothing compared to the number of Shakespeare plays all over the country to this day. It's extraordinary that one human being, one godlike human being, would transform the entire world of the English language and change how we look at ourselves, change how we look at literature. There is nothing that we read, nothing serious that we read, children's books, anything, comedy novels, that isn't influenced by Shakespeare. And so you make the leap from academia into more popular drama, because Shakespeare was the most popular dramatist of his day and still is, because he's really funny, he's
Right.
really moving, he's really scary. It's not highfalutin stuff where you need to get nervous. You just go and immerse yourself and enjoy it.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. Shakespeare, it was popular art. It was popular comedy. It was high art for the people that appreciated that level. But it was dirty humor and bawdy and silly and gross
Oh
and
man.
scatological for the groundlings. It was a little bit of everything for everyone.
Right, right.
So Ken, when you're in Washington D.C., when you come up here to New York City, is there a favorite theater that you go to? Is there a favorite group that you come to see, or is it Shakespeare in the Park? What is it that in New York? How often do you get to New York even?
Well, frequently, because my plays are there, and I don't get to go to as much theater as I want because I'm in rehearsals when the shows are playing. But of course, I get up there and I see a great deal. And well, the public is fantastic. And Shakespeare in the Park, just you can't beat it. But look at all the things that come over from England that are at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music. They get such great pieces. Oh, the Royal Shakespeare Company used to tour. They have residencies around the country. So when I go do shows, I have a show opening next week at the Alley Theater in Houston. There's tons of Shakespeare being done in Houston all the time. All our cities are bathing in it now. It's really remarkable. It's quite a change, because in the old days, it wasn't as true. It was considered a highfalutin art form. If you think back, I mean, before my time, when I'm thinking of, as I said, so many of my plays in the 30s and 40s, my comedies. So I read about the 30s and 40s all the time. And Shakespeare was the old Gielgud mode. You stood and you pronounced it beautifully and you delivered, and it would take time to change from one set to the other. And Beerbohm Tree, one of the famous actor managers, was changing sets, and it took 15 minutes to change the set, and they had real bunnies jumping around from Midsummer Night's Dream, and everyone gasped and thought it was wonderful. Now it's being done with so much panache and energy in every place you go, and looking at it from the standpoint of different ethnic groups, all one or all another, or mixing them up, and BIPOC. And it's so exciting that you can't go to New York City and not find 10 things running at any one time, 10 Shakespeare pieces running at any
Absolutely.
one time. Want to go
Absolutely.
see it?
Now there are so many Shakespeare adjacent things that are coming out, or variations on Shakespeare. There's Six the musical. There's and Juliet that's coming next month. There's all kind of things. There was a Romeo and Bernadette was off Broadway a couple of months ago. Do you have a Shakespeare variation that you have in your oeuvre, or that you're working on for the future?
Well, I'm proud to say that there is not a single one of the 32 plays and musicals that doesn't have quotations from Shakespeare in them. I just do it for fun. I do it out of love. So they always, some of my Shakespeares are based on Shakespeare specifically. I wrote a play called Shakespeare in Hollywood, which takes place during the filming of Midsummer Night's Dream in the 1930s, the famous Reinhardt version. And the premise of the piece was that Oberon and Puck, when they're on their way back to the Magic Forest at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, get lost because there's a sign that says a wood near Athens, but it's being used in the movie, and they end up in the movie, in the world of Hollywood in the 1930s. And then I wrote another one, and that's done a lot, and it won the Helen Hayes Award and the Charles MacArthur Award as best new play at the time it was done. It's done a lot around the country. And then there was another one I wrote. I thought it'd be fun. High schools do my plays and musicals a lot around the country, and colleges. So in addition to regional theaters and commercial theaters, and high schools are always looking to do Shakespeare, but it seems again a little daunting, and the great high schools do it. and that's wonderful, but then maybe a cut down version. And I thought at the time it would be fun to do, I called it Midsummer Jersey. There was a television show on at the time called Jersey Shore.
Right.
I remember, this is probably before your time, but about 10, 15 years ago. And it was kind of the lowest of the low. It was all these Jersey kids who were jumping in bed with each other and using foul language. But kids were watching it like crazy. My kids were watching it. All the kids were watching it. So I called it Midsummer Jersey. And I told the story of Midsummer Night's Dream through the changing all the characters to modern kids who are in Jersey Shore. And one summer I was asked to spend a week at Interlaken with their theater department because they were doing Midsummer Jersey. They were doing Shakespeare in Hollywood. So I, having met all these kids, and thought I'll just write a whole play about Midsummer Night's Dream, but set on the Jersey Shore, in the 1970s. And that's called Midsummer Jersey. So I'm always, and I have a new mystery I'm thinking of writing set during a particular Shakespeare performance, but I can't give that away here because then somebody will steal it.
There's the rub.
But it's coming out.
So before we wrap it up, I just want to mention that in your book, one of the things that I think is really fantastic about your book is that you have a lot of little quizzes in your book. And as a special treat for the New York Shakespeare audience, we're going to be posting one of the quizzes from your book and asking our readers to answer the quiz. And whoever answers the quiz correctly is going to be entered into a chance to win a special prize from some kind of memorabilia from Ken Ludwig, to be announced.
Great. Oh, great. Oh, I'm thrilled. Oh, and also, let me plug my website. My website, which is nothing but kenludwig.com, www.kenludwig.com, has stuff I'm doing now and blah, blah, blah. But it also has a whole game section. And in the game section, in addition to jigsaw puzzles you can do electronically, are quizzes, and there's Shakespeare quizzes there too. And free, and you can go there and do lots and lots of Shakespeare there too. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, Ken, I thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join with us here tonight. And I encourage our audience to check out your book, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. You are a legend in the industry, and you are a wonderful contributor to the world of Shakespeare education. Check it out, www.kenludwig.com. And as for the New York Shakespeare audience, I encourage you to check out all of our content across social media on Instagram, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and elsewhere, WordPress, where we bring you as much information about what is happening in the world of Shakespeare in New York, whatever format that might be, as we can. Ken, I thank you again so much. Congratulations on everything you're up to.
You're contributing so mightily to Shakespeare and to education. My hat's off to you. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll say farewell to the Shakespeare audience, and then we'll have a quick wrap up ourselves. So again, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, www.kenludwig.com, New York Shakespeare across social media. Keep your Shakespeare education as strong as you can. Go brush up your Shakespeare, and thank you. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks.